That's nice. Okay, so
are you ready?
I think so.
Can we introduce you? So my name is Lloyd Sharp, and I'm core faculty. I've had the privilege of being core faculty for Sharae Callahan since she began the program in
2000.
no,
Kim?
it hasn't been that long.
2012, I think. Maybe 12. 11 or 12.
Well, and I won't presume to tell the story of the journey, but I will just start by saying that one of my favorite things about being involved in Prescott College is the journey. Not only the journey that I get to be a part of with the students that I'm privileged enough to serve, but the journey that I get to go on myself as part of that. So Sharae has been on a wonderful journey and evolution, which she'll tell you about. And I think you'll be very interested in hearing about this wonderful intersection between education, culture, defined in a very interesting and broad way, and social psychology, which is the way that things evolve for Sharae. So I'm very pleased to introduce Sharae, and Stan, her mentor, has a couple of things to say before she starts.
We were talking about you, Sharae, about an hour or so ago, and I made a comment, and Lloyd said, I think you ought to hear that. I said, I don't know if I can recapture it or not, but I do want to say that, you know, think of Richard Bowles, who is a researcher in careers, and he said people change careers 3 to 5, some say 5 to 7 times before they leave the labor force. Well, that's one thing to state a comment like that or a statistic like that, but it's another thing to be a part of a person's life who has made several changes in their life. And one of those changes took place here at Prescott College, and she was enrolled in the school counseling program, and I had the privilege of being her mentor. I had a chance to talk to Sharae when she was doing her substitute teaching at times, and she would get carried away by talking about a student or something. I would say, yes, you know, that's the kind of school counselor we want. And then one day I got a phone call saying, I think we should another program. Our profession needs you. I admire tremendously that she is modeling what we try to teach, and that's risk taking. And she took a risk by moving to another program, and I want to congratulate you for that. And also, in terms of writing a thesis, and some of you are at that thesis stage, I will say it's one thing to sit here at Prescott College and engage in a discussion about unconditional acceptance, mutual respect, integrity, professional ethics, and it's another thing to experience it with a wonderful student like Sharae, who was able to, in a very genuine way, disagree, look at our own self-concept and our own perspectives on things, and actually live those kind of things that we normally engage in academic. That was a privilege.
Yes, we've had plenty of those academic debates, which I think that one of the really beautiful things about at Prescott is having mentors that appreciate your opinion and that does not discourage who you are and what you're trying to do. So I thank you for being that mentor that appreciated my opinion. And I also thank you for always being there for me when I called in the middle of a school counseling day and said, I can't do this. I need to find something different for me. And I also thank you for allowing them to come to you and say, okay, what are we going to do with this girl? She wants to do all of this. So how are we going to make this happen? So thank you all for giving me that opportunity to be able to now stand up in front of you and present to you what I think I'm very passionate about. Okay, so my actual story and how this all came about begins in August 2010. She was just 5 days away from her 11th birthday, but the pounding in her head and the dizziness from the double vision was of such enormity that she could barely get out of bed. It was interesting because just the day before, I had trained at the beach, and now she could barely walk. And in the span of 5 days, my perfectly healthy, athletic daughter suddenly became sick with bouts of vomit and intense blackouts. There were no obvious signs of a cold, flu, cough, sore throat, fever, or any other indication that might suggest that she had a viral infection, yet when I rushed her into the nearby urgent care facility, the nurse practitioner ruled it as exactly that, a viral infection based on a temperature test and a visual examination. Now, we as parents know our children better than they know themselves sometimes, right? And we know when something just isn't right. I remember pleading with the nurse practitioner to please give her something, give her anything that would take away the pain, but apparently she didn't understand the complexity of my daughter's issues. Her head was heavy and throbbing. Her vision was doubled. Is there even a viral infection that causes double vision? But our problem had been dismissed as exactly that, our problem. And I was advised to increase the dosage of an over-the-counter pain reliever. On my daughter's second day of agonizing pain, the most intense blackout occurred. This time I heard a loud bang from my bedroom as my daughter plowed down onto the kitchen floor. And naturally, as a concerned parent, I rushed her in to the nearby emergency room. But again, to my dismay, the attending physician took one look at her and said, "She looks perfectly fine to me." His seemingly cold demeanor discounted the fact that a perfectly healthy child does not suddenly have blackouts. But again, our problem had been dismissed as exactly that, our problem. 3 days later, my daughter's right eye turned inward as her left eye remained straight. She had developed palsies of the cranial nerves due to elevated spinal fluid pressure in her brain. A medical doctor had made the diagnosis over the phone without even seeing her. And based on his advice, I rushed my daughter into an emergency room that was 1 hour away. And when she arrived, she was subjected to 2 spinal taps and would soon undergo year-long visits with medical physicians and specialists. Now, to his credit, when the first emergency room physician was later questioned by the medical board as to why he did not provide my daughter with additional action, he stated amongst many reasons that it was his belief that a child her age and athletic stature did not warrant any further diagnosis. In other words, he wasn't acting in a conscious sense that my daughter was unworthy. Instead, he acted on a stereotype that pseudotumor cerebri was most prevalent in individuals between the ages of 20 and 50 and seriously obese. And possessing that stereotype was understandable considering that 90% of case studies have linked pseudotumor cerebri to obesity. But the application of a stereotype to one particular individual is problematic because the application has serious consequences. Take, for instance, Omar J. Edwards, a 25-year-old off-duty police officer who was fatally shot and killed in Harlem by a fellow police officer who mistook him or stereotyped him for a black suspect. Or Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old who was fatally shot and killed because it was believed that his outward appearance was suspicious. Then there's 18-year-old Deshaun Curry. On October 9, 2014, police bombarded into his home, telling him to place his hands on the ground because they believed him to be a burglar. When Curry said, "No, this is my home," the police officers pointed to a mantle where there were 3 photos of 3 white children and accused him of a false story, then pepper sprayed him as they detained him. You see, African-American Deshaun Curry was adopted by that white family. We make stereotypes on some of the most flimsiest criteria, one being skin color. And unfortunately, it has many people of diverse backgrounds, their lives, proper education, and access to adequate health care. Now, I'm not here to convince you that stereotypes exist. We've been discussing the term since its introduction in the early 1700s. And as inaccurate as stereotypes are, research has confirmed in the aid of categories or in terms of stereotypes. I'm also not here to convince you that racial discrimination exists. Because Well, numbers don't lie. And there are quantifiable racial disparities in almost every sector of America that we just can't overlook. For instance, there are stark differences in the health outcomes of black and white patients with the same condition, even when they are treated by the same doctor. One particular outcome is that African American patients are more likely to develop and die from cancer than any other racial or ethnic group. And this is likely because physicians are not referring patients to receive curative cancer care. Although some people may engage in deliberate discrimination, I do not believe that modern America is racist. I also do not believe that the people of today are driven by hate. I do, however, believe that we are making implicit bias assumptions based on stereotypes about particular groups that are extremely harmful, and we're doing so without any conscious intent. These unconscious microaggressions are damaging the psychological welfare of diverse groups, and this is what's contributing to inequities and disparities that we commonly see in industries such as education and healthcare. Implicit biases are subtle mental attitudes towards a particular group or person held at an unconscious level. We might consciously reject racism, but because of all of the stories that have been told to us throughout the years, negative associations have formed hidden biases. It is an undisputed fact that all human beings are primed to make implicit errors in perception. Even good people who actively deny being biased harbor subtle yet damaging stereotypes of which they are unaware. Take, for instance, the term genetics, of or related to genes or heredity. Well, it's not uncommon to assume that because there are more cases of diabetes in diverse groups, such as African Americans or Hispanic Americans, that these particular groups must have a gene that makes them susceptible to type 2 diabetes. But as Richard Cooper, professor of medicine, once wrote, talking about black people having a gene that predisposes them to some disorder or another feeds a social process that is deeply negative. Black Americans suffer more from high blood pressure than white Americans. We don't know why, but everyone says it's genetic. But if you look around the world, by far the highest hypertension rates are in Poland, Finland, and Russia, much higher than black Americans. No one has ever said that these white people are genetically predisposed to hypertension. It must be their diet. But when they talk about blacks, it has to be genetics. And that, in a nutshell, is the whole problem with this whole way of thinking. You see, every story, every tragedy that I have shared with you thus far tells us that we are failing to perceive individuals as individuals, and that we are representing people in terms of social groups. And as long as we do not see people as people, we will continue to feed this deeply negative social process that will not only rob another generation of opportunities, but will continue to rob people of color their lives. Researchers or diversity experts have termed something known as cross-cultural education or cultural competence to help professionals and organizations to become aware of their attitudes and sensitive to differences in cultures. They do this by exploring congruent behavior amongst particular groups. But in my opinion, this does not and will not solve our racial discrimination or disparity problems. It simply places a Band-Aid on it. You see, here's what some cross-cultural education currently looks like. Every person on this screen is Black Spanish, Black Latino, some were even born and raised in Spain. But because of the color of their skin, they will all be placed in one category as Black. And the current predominant modern stereotype for that category is, violent, dominant, lazy, and welfare recipient. The General Social Survey revealed that 54% of whites believe blacks as less intelligent, 62% consider blacks as lazier, 56% believe that blacks were more prone to violence, and 78% deemed that blacks preferred to live off of welfare. In 2013, the most recent published data on stereotypes and biases was reported by blind spot researchers Banerjee and Greenwald, who revealed discriminatory behavior in 75% of the participants who took the test. And these individuals earnestly believe that all people were equal and deserved equal rights, yet they harbored discriminatory behavior. What this means is that cross-cultural education alone cannot solve our racial discrimination and disparity issues without first addressing implicit biases and stereotypes. You see, when people are trying to understand human behavior, they're constructing their own behavioral explanations. And the way that race is currently being analyzed in cross-cultural education is suggesting that because a person has a certain skin color, they must possess certain habit and risky behavior. And as Thomas Levy once wrote, the color of a person's skin has nothing to do with the way he or she behaves, and furthermore, their culture. Ultimately, cross-cultural education, some of cross-cultural education reinforces stereotypes because it limits individuals to a set list of characteristics, and this potentially dehumanizes an individual's unique identity. You see, the self, who someone is, cannot be defined by someone else. But humanity has this long evolutionary past that has helped to shape our thoughts about people's culture, about people's race, about people's ethnicity, about people's identity, and this has transformed our sense of what is just and what is fair. The origins of these stories are stored in our unconscious and our subconscious mind, and although the mind is very powerful, it is a far from perfect organ. Most people end up believing and knowing things that are simply not true. And so if we truly want to move the needle on our discrimination issues, our disparity techniques, we need to have real conversations about race, racism, ethnicity, and identity. I believe that this piece of the puzzle is what's needed in helping to solve those issues. You see, our social attitudes and perceptions shape our mental processes and behaviors. It is impossible for us to change our behavior towards an individual if we're not willing to explore our social attitudes from its roots. And I believe, personally, that we do that by exploring racism's historical concepts. And this just completely went the opposite way. Let's go back. Okay, I don't know what's going on with your computer.
Back, maybe. Sorry.
That's okay.
You can keep talking. I'll catch up. But if I catch up, you keep talking.
No, because it's a part of the Okay. So, I believe that we need to explore racism's historical concepts because the correlation between historical racism and cultural competence is relevant because the idea of race has been found to be psychological and sociopathic rather than biological. And even if today we reject this idea of race, if we do not explore our social attitudes from its roots, if we are in a negative situation, automatic feelings and beliefs will be translated into physical equivalent. Take, for instance, the recent Ferguson protester march. Many racist remarks were made to the black protesters, but one in particular stood out by a small white blonde woman who yelled to the protesters, "We're the ones who gave y'all the freedoms that you have," reminding them of the history of oppression, slavery, inequality, and racism. You see, awareness is the first step that cross-cultural education teaches, but our behavior exists in our minds. And there's an incredible link between the mind and the body. What you think, you believe, and what you have been taught to think about a person, their history, their culture plays a critical role in how you approach situations. And so, by exploring racism's historical concepts, we are able to dive deeper into our own thought process. Generally speaking, the information that we think we know about people, their history, is based on personal biases. This is known as interpersonal. These are stories that have been told to us by other individuals, or stories that we have constructed ourselves, known as intrapersonal. But most of these stories are not grounded in fact. However, the mind is using it as a reference point to decide on how we are going to respond to other individuals. Take, for instance, skin color. Although it's nothing more than a human variation, because while race has no basis in biological or scientific fact, the thought about race, because of all of the stories that have been told to us, causes feelings of differences that are often igniters of stereotypes, hate, disparities, and intergroup conflict. Our subconscious and even our unconscious mind begins to slant how we see and reason with things. What this means is that the disparity exists in each one of us between our intentions and our ideals on one hand, and our behaviors and our actions on the other. These disparities undermine our self-awareness, and this is what threatens our ability to consciously control our actions and our thoughts. That's why good people with great intentions hold biases and stereotypes that create an us versus them mentality. Take, for instance, teachers. Teachers go to school to teach. But a recent CAP poll revealed that teachers had lower expectations for Black and Latino students, so they taught to that expectation. The intention of teaching was there. Their behavior was doing something different. And doctors go to work to heal, but over 600 studies revealed by the Institute of Medicine showed that still today, Black and minority patients receive less than quality health care. The intention of healing is there. Their behavior is doing something different. And I truly believe, and I could be naive, but I believe that police officers initially enter into the force to protect. But in October 2013, when Trayon Christian went and purchased a $350 Ferragamo belt, he was detained and interrogated for hours, then hauled down to the police station in handcuffs until his bank verified his own purchase. His lawyer wrote that the only crime he committed was that of being Black. And Oprah was no different. When she was shopping in a fancy Swiss store last year, she was denied the opportunity to see and possibly purchase a $38,000 handbag. You see, I don't believe that we have a behavior problem. I believe we have is a mind problem. And the only way I believe to fix that is by deceiving our subconscious mind and giving it new instructions. And we do that by exploring racism's historical concepts. And what we will show ourselves is that this idea of race is no more than a social concept giving social meaning in order to form inequality. We then must move from theory to practice. We do that by exploring our generated ideas and knowledge. What we will find is that no one, absolutely no one, is born with the culture. We are all socialized into a culture of thoughts, feelings, ideas, norms, standards that have been conveyed to us by parents, teachers, caregivers, and others. We must challenge those thoughts, feelings, standards, because they're grand narratives that have been embedded in local narratives. And once we challenge them, we'll dispel the ones that are simply not true in order for us to intervene into our own disparity issues. And then we must explore social constructivism. What we will find is that people cannot be packaged into ready-made categories. People are complex systems of interrelated actions. The problem is we're focusing on isolated parts of that system, such as skin color, and wondering why racial discriminations and disparities still exist. Further, culture is fluid. It is not static. It is constantly changing and is not comprehensible by searching for a single cause, such as race, and then putting people into these components or categories. We have to begin to view people and culture in a non-linear method. We have to begin to see people as people. And the cross-cultural curriculum that I have begun to develop does exactly that, based on all of the research that I have just shared with you today. But obviously, it's impossible for me to convey it all in 20 minutes. And so before we get ready to close, I do want to share with you a story of an individual who was able to deceive his subconscious mind. And his name was John. And I had the opportunity to meet him at 2 a.m. one morning when once again I had to haul my daughter down to the emergency room due to massive swelling in her eye. And I am strongly convinced that John knew that she was having an allergic reaction to one of those bug bites that was on her, but he never broke his concerned manner and his friendly smile. You see, John was the attending ER physician, but he introduced himself on a first name basis. And when I asked him why, he said, you know what? I'm John first. And so many people forget that. So many people forget why they come into their profession. And I never, ever want to pull myself away from the people that I serve. But this was something that he had to learn. Well, I had the opportunity to meet John about a month ago. And he shared with me that he has a social psychologist that works with him on his social and bedside behavior. And that allowed him to cross over the middle line that once showed him now shows him that we are more alike than we are different. I believe that John's just like me attitude is what everyone needs, because that attitude might mean the difference between life and death for someone. Thank you. What questions do you have for me?
Sharae,
yes.
I'd love for you to talk about how you see your curriculum. You were mentioning this to me the other day, yesterday, about how you see this curriculum applying to many more settings beyond the healthcare profession. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the reason why I kind of touched a little bit on certain things like the police officers and the healthcare and education, because I do believe that we need some sort of, and I don't like to use the word cross-cultural curriculum, but some sort of curriculum that will allow us to intervene into our implicit biases and our hidden biases and all of those things in order for us to be a successful society. I mean, one of the reason why I do what I do or have this passion for this is because Trayvon Martin could have been my son. You know, Thomas Duncan in the healthcare industry could have been my father. So I think that we need something more than cross-cultural education, because cross-cultural education takes you back to thinking about, okay, how can we keep ourselves separate? How can we look at Asians? How can we look at blacks? I think we need something more that allows us to intervene into our hidden biases and our stereotype issues.
So this happens to be something I've been considering in one of my courses, is about how identity formation happens, and that whole schema we can put together of ideas that we react out of fear, and we're not even conscious that we're reacting out of past experience,
Absolutely.
often, and not really the present moment with our thinking or perceiving reality. And I'm curious if you could share maybe like one or two strategies you have to kind of break open that schema in a way that's not like jarring and allows people to like if you have that kind of stuff, like, yeah, I'm assuming you do, you know, just, because I think about my own experience when somebody's challenges, even like something really minor about my identity, and says this is contributing to something really negative in the world. As a human, like physiological processes, I go into fear response and cling more to my identity and be defensive. And then I have to really relax into the process and dispel that fear. So I'm curious if you have any insight to how to bring that into people's lives in maybe a more calm way.
Right. I think the reason why a lot of people act the way they do is because they don't know any other way. One, and then I also think history plays a lot of part into why we do what we do. And so that's why I believe that we have to kind of go backwards a little bit to move forward. I personally believe that we need to explore a lot of historical things, historical racism, all of that, to even understand how we got to where we're at. Because we could say, okay, you know what, race means nothing, but then tomorrow we can walk out and do something to someone else. So we really don't understand why it means nothing. We have to, it's like my son. Instead of me just telling him no, he can't do something, I have to explain why I'm telling him no, he can't do something, if that makes any sense. So I think that we need to go back through the historical aspect of why we are who we are. Personally, I don't have an identity that I know of. You know, my parents didn't teach me that this is who you are, and this is your race, and this is your culture, and, you know, they didn't teach me any of that at all. I just knew that I need to check black on the paper. But why? Why am I checking that? You know, and so that's why I think we have to go back through the historical aspect. And now I can decide whether I want to check other. And I do. I told the story last year about how I was in the doctor's office and I didn't get something approved because I told them I was the human race. Because now I know that I am of the human race. You know, I grew up eating tacos and tostadas, not all according to them in the black culture. It doesn't. So what does that make me? Right? I'm human. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, probably not. But like I said, I think personally we just have to go backwards in order to move forward.
Sure. Would you just tell everyone very briefly about the curriculum you developed? Related to her thesis was a project.
Yeah.
So if you just maybe take a minute and tell them about what you did.
Okay, so for my thesis, I developed this curriculum that I'm actually going to hand over to Lori right now. You did, but it's not completely done because the editing, I'm working on the editing. And the curriculum actually talks about historical everything, historical racism, how we got to where we're at, the idea about race. It's been socially constructed up until today. And then it goes through and it talks about how our identity is developed based on social things that happen to us around us. So our identity is not, typically our identity is not developed by us being a part of a black community, a white community, an Asian community. It is developed based out there in the social world. And it's constantly changing. So then it goes through this as well. And then let's see what else it talks about because it's pretty long. So, oh, and then it also talks about unconscious mind and how I believe that we intervene our unconscious mind, subconscious mind. And I believe, and this has not been it yet, but I honestly believe that we do by feeding ourselves new instructions. We got it based on instructions that have been conveyed to us by everyone else. We have to start feeding our mind new instructions in order for us to intervene into that process. But again, it's not tested yet, but that's what I believe we need to do to intervene into our unconscious mind.
I don't know, this is wonderful. I don't know if there's, I'd love to hear an example of a piece of history that you're excited about teaching, or a historical example.
Okay, I don't know if we have time, but for one, in 1700s, the idea of race was just simply based on the way individual skulls were. That's it. Some guy came up and he said, I think this skull is pretty, I'm going to call it white. I think that this skull is not so pretty based on the craniometrics. We're going to call that skull African American. So he started categorizing these different skulls, and that's how these concepts of Native American, African American, white, all of that came out in the 1700s. And then it continued to grow from there. So that's one particular piece that I would love to teach about. See, we think that this idea of race came from slavery, but it didn't. It started in the 1700s by some guy who thought certain skulls were ugly and certain skulls were pretty. And then in 1997, the Office of Budget and Management said, okay, how are we going to classify now school systems and this and that? So then they came up with categories, and it just continued. And now we have the anthropology people who are saying race has no base. It has no base in biological or scientific fact, but they're not teaching why it does not have any base. So that's why I believe that even if you say, okay, I reject this idea of race, you don't truly believe it because you don't know why. You don't know why to believe it. So I think you have to go backwards and start saying, this is why it's not true. Because this guy just said, I'm going to call this skull this color and skull that color. So. Yes, ma'am.
So you developed the curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
and who is the curriculum guided towards, like, what age group, or is this an adult program, or does it begin as children?
Okay, so Blue Sky. My Blue Sky whole idea for this curriculum is to see it in both places, right? So I would love to teach it in both the professional organizations, such as police officers and healthcare and things like in education, but I would love to get our kids involved in this because I believe that if they knew this, they wouldn't respond to situations the way that they do. We respond to situations based on stigmas that have been told to us throughout the years, but if we could know why those stigmas are there, they wouldn't respond the way that they do. So if somebody came to, say, an African American person or a Native American person and called them whatever it is they called them, if that kid knew that you don't know what you're talking about, they wouldn't respond the same way. And maybe we wouldn't have some of the issues that we have, right? So that would be my whole entire, if I could get grants to make that happen, I would love to do it both, teach both areas.
Do you think it'll be hard to get a buy-in from these?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the idea of race is formed to create inequalities and inequities. It is there for that reason. It really is. But I heard yesterday in that grant class that I was in that someone out there is going to believe in that. So I'm going to that's what Peter told me. He said someone is going to believe in that.
I'm acting too. It's wonderful.
Thank you. So I'm gonna keep going. I don't know how long it's gonna take, but I'm gonna keep going. Thanks. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So if you're saying this for both age ranges, is this curriculum that you developed more focused on the racial history piece? And I'm wondering if you see the older one incorporating more of that social psychology piece that you talk about a lot. And I think this kind of speaks to this woman's question here too of how do we get away from defending our identity? And you've mentioned this several times that our identities are socially constructed. So is this a component bringing that to light, how we don't necessarily have to, not that we don't have to feel bad for bad things that we do, but we can treat ourselves with more compassion because knowing that these are social constructs that we look into as opposed to this is like who we are.
Right. I remember talking to Lloyd about self-identity and trying to figure out how I could even talk about that more. And that is something that I would love to do one day. I just don't know how we teach on self-identity. Like, how do you teach that? And then if we are teaching that, that's nothing more than what's already happening. Our society is teaching us what our identity is. It's up to us to decide on whether we're going to go that direction or not. So, I don't know how we can teach on self-identity. and what you should be and what you shouldn't be and how you should be. I do know, however, back to what you were talking about, I do know if we start teaching on stigmas and how to respond to certain stigmas, I think that would help in a lot of areas. They do it, they actually do it in the jail. They teach, they call people same names in the jail, so that way when that person comes out of prison, they don't allow that to bother them so much that they would go back behind bars. They actually do teach a system of that in prison, amongst themselves, amongst certain groups. It's not like the prison guards were teaching it, but amongst certain groups, they teach those things. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any go-to references to learning about like the racial history of things? So like, we're all just like after like 90% of our classes. Like, do you have the resources to look to that sort of like?
Yeah, so this will be published very soon, but I do. You email me and I'll give you some of my resources. I'll give you my email address. I can give it to you right now. Sharae, S-H-A-R-A-E, at sharae.com. And I can give you the list of resources that I have. Any other questions?
Well, I just have one.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I wondered, Noelle, if you would comment on listening to what you say about how to teach self-identity, and it makes me wonder if there wouldn't be some commonalities between how you would expose issues of self-identity in the same way that you do with exposing biases. Can you see an intersection between the two and how you might use similar techniques to bring those things to the surface of our awareness?
I think the similarity is bias only exists if it's an unexamined position. And we're saying the same things. In research, bias exists if it's unexamined. And the same sort of thing with sticking with stereotypes and sticking with that. Without just examining the history will have an impact on changing behavior.
I think so. Thank you. Well, I thank you all for allowing me to share with you the energies of my heart. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to use that.
That's a wonderful thing.
They let me do that.
Oh,